starting the recording now.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Career Development. Today we are going to be discussing the amazing topic of home inspections. I know it's something that everybody has to deal with, and sometimes it can be very intimidating to negotiate those things. So we have, as far as I'm concerned, we can't ask for any better expert on contracts than the Whiteheads, especially Kerry. Weren't you on like the forums or on the forums committee or something for?
I am on the forums committee.
Yeah.
Been on it for quite some time.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're very lucky to have their expertise on this call. Kerry always brings a lot of value when it comes to contract discussions. So we are going to be discussing negotiating home inspections and basically how to keep your deals together. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michael and Kerry, and you guys can have a discussion and learn some stuff.
Mr. and Mrs. Whitehead, thank you for joining us today.
Sure. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, I guess in today's real estate climate, we're looking at ideas on how to keep our deals together. So we're assuming at this point we have got a property under contract and we are having the home inspection to work in the best interests of our buyer. And the home inspector finds some items in the house. Now, there's a couple different scenarios here. Is there a laundry list? Is it a bunch of minor things? Is it some major things? Is there anything that you pre-frame your buyers on before the home inspection starts to prepare them for that process?
Yeah, I think so. The number one thing you need to do is you need to know your buyer. If you're representing a buyer, you need to know your buyer, and you need to know how they're going to react or guess how they're going to react at the home inspection list. Now, the other thing to remember too is if you're on the seller's side, if you're on the listing side, keep in mind that home inspector works for the buyer, not for the seller. That home inspector, you're going to get, whether it's new construction or resale, there's going to be something on a home inspection. And so you need to remember on the listing side that, don't get too excited about these things, because that home inspector is there to represent the buyer, protect the buyer. And so they're going to list everything, whether you think it's small or not, and whether you think it's irrelevant or not. They're going to list every single thing that they find when they inspect that house. So just keep that in mind and make sure that you know who your buyer is. And because new buyers get very scared. New buyers get very concerned when they see a list of items, whereas people that have bought and sold houses, several times, they don't get quite as excited about things. So know your client, number one, going in, and also don't overreact to the home inspection list. If you get a laundry list of things, it's your job to present that to your buyer. Going back to the buyer side, it's your job to present that to the buyer and let them look at it and let them react to it, and then get back to you as to how they feel about it. And then it becomes your job to guide them through the process. It's not your job to tell them what to get fixed and what not to get fixed and what they can repair and what they can't repair. Your job is to guide them through the process. Let them decide what's important to them and what's not. Now, if they do start nitpicking and asking for a screw to be replaced and an outlet plate, things like that, and your home inspection addendum gets to be 3 and 4 pages, then you need to step in and guide them as to, they're probably going to kill the deal. When you start turning in 3 and 4 page home inspection addendums, the seller's not going to be very happy with that. And so know your client, guide them through the process, but let them make the decisions on what should and should not be on that addendum.
One thing I do with my clients, if they are going toward that I want everything on the list presented to the seller is I make them prioritize the, you know, the line items that are deal breakers. Let's put those at the top, and then let's categorize the ones that, you know, you would move on, but you would prefer that the seller do it. And then the last bit is, yeah, let's throw it in here and see if it sticks. So that way, when I present the home inspection addendum to the seller's agent, that I at least, you know, can let them know that, you know, not which items are, but it's like the higher up the list they are, the more of a priority they are. So that, you know, the owner of the house doesn't feel like, oh, I'm going to do the bottom, you know, 3/4 because it's going to look like I'm doing a lot. And then I'm just going to leave the top ones and not do those. You know, that's going to kill the deal. So, you know, if you at least can give them a heads up on what is important to your client, then they'll know what to focus on and we'll have a better success rate going forward. So.
Now, when we started this, you said know your client. I've also been a proponent of know your home inspector. I refer to some home inspectors as fire and brimstone home inspectors because they kind of, pardon my language, but will scare the hell out of a buyer. And have you had success getting to know a home inspector who's going to be completely honest and tell a buyer about a house, but not scare them? Whereas you got another guy that there might be some minor things, but he makes them sound like it's the end of the world. Any guidance on that?
Well, that's why it's important that you're at the home inspection with your client.
Yeah.
Very important. So don't send your clients to these home inspections without going with them, because that way you know what they're talking about. Because here's the other thing. Home inspectors these days, they're not handwriting these reports. They're using templates, and those templates are all pre-worded. All they're doing is checking a box, and it's throwing the information onto a report. So you got to be careful, and so you got to be there with your client.
You know, there's a popular home inspector, and I use him too, whose verbiage on every home inspection says the air conditioning is working fine, but I have seen air conditioners fail the day after a home inspection.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah.
What in the world do you do with that? And that's on, I thought it was just on, you know, when he did a home inspection for my seller, I was shocked and alarmed that I saw that, but then he did one for a buyer of mine, same thing. So it must be a standard cover your ass form that the home inspectors use that says, hey, it's working right now, but tomorrow could not be working. It's like, what is a buyer supposed to do with that? Right. So I would be very careful and make sure, again, knowing your home inspector, Michael, is saying, look, this is not directed at this house. This is on every form covers their ass. So, you know, you have to also not ask for something that's not warranted, because, you know, every home inspector would be asking for the HVAC to be replaced in its entirety in every single house, because, you know, that's what it says.
And the other thing to remember too is try and take, especially your younger buyers, try and take them over to the other side when they're going to sell the property and somebody does a home inspection and the home inspection says the HVAC is working fine, but you know, the seller's side, it's working fine. Why would they fix something that's working fine? You know, so you got to get your buyers to understand the other side, because at some point they're going to sell the house as well, and they're going to be on the other side of that home inspection. So, you know, if I got a home inspection on my house that said, yeah, you got good hot water and no problems, but it might only last another year, well, it's working fine. I don't replace my hot water heater until something's wrong with it, right? I mean, why would I replace something that's working fine? So make sure your buyers, especially the young ones, understand the other side, because they will be there someday. Okay.
You also say that we put a warranty on the property.
Well, it depends on if you have the buyer or the seller again.
Right.
But if you have a listing, encourage that seller to get the home warranty up front. Okay.
Right.
Look, they don't
Yeah.
pay for it unless it goes to closing. But you can't, once you have a home inspection and a home inspector says your HVAC needs service, you can't call and put a home warranty on it and then have the home warranty do the HVAC service. You got to have it in place. Home warranty companies are looking at that. Okay, so if I put a home warranty on a property and a day later call in with a bunch of items I need fixed, they're not buying it. They're not going for it. So encourage your sellers to have the home warranty in place at the time they do the listing so that they can utilize it as well. And then it transfers over to the buyer at closing.
And sometimes that home warranty, giving it to the buyer, looking at the home inspection items and saying, okay, we're not going to do this. We'll actually just give you a home warranty. That usually doesn't fly because they want that house addressed with the home inspection. You know, some people may take that and say, okay, we'll do it later, but most won't. Because what if the warranty company doesn't fix it or won't replace it? Or, you know, most buyers will want a house that's in good working condition when they go to close. And then if something happens after that, then they've got the home warranty to cover it. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that that's going to be the end of it, because it more often than not will not be.
And also home warranty companies won't cover existing conditions. So if something comes up on the home warranty and the buyer and the seller
Home inspection.
on the home inspection, sorry, and the seller says, hey, you know what, I'm giving you a home warranty, get it fixed yourself. That's an existing condition. So once it goes to closing and the buyer calls in for it, they may not cover it. So
May not. I mean, they might, but then again, they might not.
They might not. You don't know. So anyways, your negotiation for the home inspection items should be done as a negotiation prior to closing. So you got, and so if you can't come to an agreement, which, look, we're all seeing problems with home inspections. Home inspections are probably the #1 reason why contracts fall apart. Okay. You got to make sure that both sides during the negotiation. And you could tell, you can tell from when you're negotiating the contract right up front, you're negotiating the price and all the different aspects of the contract. If that's a train wreck of a negotiation, you can pretty much be assured that any negotiations after you become ratified are going to be a train wreck as well.
Well, and here's another thing, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, and you guys may already know this, but I
know it, but go ahead.
I like to counsel my buyers up front when they're trying to get this wicked, deal and really, gouge the seller to get this price that they want and the terms that they want. It's, the more, I like to kind of start having this conversation right at the very beginning and say, look, if you get this seller kicking and screaming, accepting your offer under duress, they need to sell and it's not the price they want, which is not happening as much anymore because it's almost kind of like a seller's market now. But anyway, I like to have this conversation if it's warranted. The better the deal you get up front, the less likely the seller's going to be pliable during the home inspection. They're going to feel like we gave you everything we're prepared to give, and whatever you ask on the home inspection, even though they may not say it's as is, that's in their mind, it's money, and they've already given money. So I always try to say, be careful what you get up front because it may hurt you in other negotiations throughout the contract. So, if something does come up on the home inspection, you might be out of luck. So, and that way they already have it in their mind, oh, I got this good deal, and sometimes they don't, sometimes they have amnesia, but I always try to tell them, okay, you got this great deal up front. They may be less likely to do things you want them to do on the home inspection. So, you know, you kind of have to begin with the end in mind and understand kind of where you're going and where you need the seller to be pliable, and you know, preface that with the buyer along the way, including the home inspection negotiation.
You know,
With that point being made, with the current market conditions, I was also going to ask, if you're in that multiple offer situation and your folks win out, do you possibly take it easy on the seller as far as coming back with a laundry list of items, because that seller knows that they just had 4 other offers and they've chosen to work with you? And do your buyers kind of walk that fine line of asking for too much, or any ideas on that particular situation?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Here's the thing. If you're on the buyer's side and you're in a multiple offer situation, you have no idea what the other offers were. You have no idea whether the seller was even interested in any of those other offers, you know? So you got to be a little careful of when you negotiate that, because you're right. The seller could say, okay, I'm going to accept their offer, but if they ask for anything on a home inspection, I'm going to kick them out. I'm just not going to do it. And they'll void the, you know, the contract, you know, for the home inspection. But the problem is you don't know what the other offers were. So,
Well,
the other thing I'll say about that too is, a lot of times when you get into a multiple offer situation and best and final is called for, a lot of buyers will say, what can I do to enhance my offer other than just increasing the price? You got to be very careful about suggesting or advising your buyers to not do a home inspection, because that's one of the things they'll say, well, maybe I just want to do a home inspection. Well, let them decide that. Don't ever tell your buyers not to do a home inspection. Okay. That's just asking for trouble down the road, because if something goes wrong, they're calling you. Hey, you told me not to do a home inspection. So be very careful. If you have, especially with new young buyers, if you have a seasoned buyer that's done this many times, they know what they're doing, they can decide that, you know. But be very careful, because every buyer has somebody in their family that can fix anything, right? You know, so everybody has it. But they're going to call you first. If something goes wrong, they're not going to call a family member that can fix anything. They're going to call you first and say, hey, you told me not to have a home inspection. So just be very wary of that.
well,
Kerry just brought up an excellent point, as far as everybody in their family has somebody that can fix everything. When you write those requests for repairs up to the seller, especially on electrical inspection or electrical repairs and plumbing repairs, it would probably be in your client's best interest if you noted that you wanted those items to be fixed by a licensed plumber or electrician or HVAC person, because everybody's got Uncle Freddie that can fix everything, but you know, how good is Uncle Freddie? So that's
if you use
something I would recommend.
If you use the right home inspection addendum, it says right on there it's supposed to be done by a qualified contractor. So that, and one other thing I wanted to note too is, if you have the seller, if you have a listing, and you do a seller's net sheet for that seller, you do a seller's net sheet up front for them, make sure you have a line item in there that says repairs, and put a number in there. And you should know when you go, you know, to that listing appointment, you look at the house, you know that some houses are going to require more repairs than other houses. Put a line item in there that says repairs, and put $1,000 in there, or $2,000, whatever it is, so that when you get that home inspection addendum from the buyers, you can tell your sellers, hey, you know what? We've got that built into your seller's net sheet already, and you agreed that you would accept this net for the sale of your house. We've already got that built in there. So, you know, if it's $2,000, we've already got $2,000 worth of repairs built into your seller's net sheet. So let's not let's not refuse to do anything, because we've already talked about this. We've already put a specific number in there, and you agreed to it up front. So make sure you do that.
Carrie, I have a question. If your seller is selling as is and refuse to put any more money into the house, do you still put that much into the that sheet?
No, if your seller tells you that I'm selling it as is, put a 0 in there. Because if you put money in there, you can't go back and tell your seller, hey, by the way, I put $1,000 in here.
What about lender required repairs?
Well, that's a different story. And you need to be schooling your sellers up front. If you want to sell as is, that's fine. But when we get the appraisal back and the lender says these things need to be fixed before we go to closing, the seller's got to decide whether they want to sell their house or not. And those repairs need to be done before closing. So you need to have that conversation with your seller.
You can tell, I mean, when you go through your listing appointment, you know, you should be making notes on, on the condition of the house and whether or not it will pass FHA appraisal, VA, USDA, and I also have a list of FHA items that an FHA appraiser looks for, and I send that if I have a client whose house kind of, you know, the trim is, you know, the paint is, you know, peeling and raw wood is showing, or, you know, something's a trip hazard. You know, if I'm having a trouble talking to a seller about that, I send them this list that says these are things that can come up in an appraisal and keep you from selling your house, so that they can, you know, my hope is that they address it up front, and then we don't have to worry about it. But
yeah,
Jennifer, I was wondering, do you prefer getting your seller to have a home inspection done in the process of listing their property?
I don't.
No.
Okay.
And that's an interesting point, because you hear that all the time about, well, maybe to, you know, have your seller do a home inspection up front. Well, you know, that's like doing an appraisal up front. You don't know. You know, we're not appraisers, we're not home inspectors, and 2 different home inspectors and 2 different appraisals are going to come up with 2 different things for the most part. So we typically don't suggest that our sellers do a home inspection up front. So
Okay, I have one other question. Like when you get the list back of repairs that the buyer wants and everything, do you give them a credit, or do you go ahead and have the items fixed?
You know, it's really, you have to know the situation and you have to ask the seller. Just like I say, I always, you know, kind of prioritize the list so that I can put the most important ones at the top. You also need to have that question with your buyer, if they would just credit, you know, is it have to repair it, or is it a credit? And you have to have that conversation. It's so situational, because you don't know the personality. Right now, just sitting here and talking about a negotiation, you don't know the personality of the buyer. You don't know the personality of the seller. You don't know how much funds are at play. You don't know how, you know, so you certainly would want to talk to the buyer's agent or the listing agent and say, would they take, you know, credit in lieu of repairs, you know. So it's talk to that other agent about, you know, what the other party is willing or able to do, so that you know how to negotiate it best to keep it going.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was 2 points that I wanted to address, and that was one of them. In a situation where there might be a laundry list of little minor repairs, is it easier to ask the seller to fix 9 little items, or just say seller agrees to pay $700 towards home inspection repairs, buyer takes care of it after closing, and that way the seller doesn't have to get a contractor over there or multiple contractors over there to inconvenience them going in and out of the house to make the repairs. On the flip side of this,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Kerry.
So the other thing is, again, you need to know your contract because you can't just, in some cases, you can't just write up an addendum that says the seller's going to give the buyer $700 for home inspection repairs. The lender's not going to like that. The lender's going to want to know, wait a minute, what are the home inspection repairs? Let me see the home inspection report. Or, so you got to know the contract. What's that?
That happens.
It's like, don't ever give the lender the home
Yeah.
inspection.
Yeah, I know, but
And-
you know what? I've had them ask for it.
Well-
I've had lenders ask for a home inspection report before, and that's not something you want.
So
Never
what-
share that.
Yeah, so I always circle back around. I always say that if there is a credit, then you also need a separate document that just says the seller will give the buyer $2,000 in closing credit, and that's done. It's sanitized. And then you can refer to that on the home inspection reply that, in lieu of repairs, the seller will be giving the buyer $2,000 credit. See, closing cost credit addendum. And that can go on that one. And then the other one is, sanitized for the lender.
How do you manage it when you're getting credits on your home inspection repairs, but you're already almost at your cap on seller subsidy based on the loan, and you don't, because those credits eventually will just wind up back in the seller's hands if the closing costs and all those things don't add up. So
Yep.
how do you manage that?
Something else to negotiate, or if there's a vendor that they know they're going to use, the seller can always prepay that vendor that amount. If you've got an estimate from ABC Construction and they're going to be the ones doing it, you can always just have the seller provide that check at closing to them. But yeah, that's a good point. Is it going to be used?
And look, when you're negotiating a home inspection addendum, the entire contract opens up again for negotiation. It's not just the addendum. So there might be something else. For instance, if you weren't supplying a home warranty, maybe you can throw in a $700 home warranty, or not that the buyer can use it to fix those things, but it gives the buyer a warm fuzzy for the next year that all these things are covered. The entire contract is open for negotiation, which means the sales price, any closing costs, anything can be negotiated at that point. And that's where you need to know the contract and the people involved, because you need to come to some sort of agreement in order to move forward.
That's fair.
I've
Thank
been
you.
in situations where there was a substantial amount of repairs, and I have recommended to my seller clients to increase the sales price. And there's been a couple of times where the deal fell apart, and there's been a couple situations where the buyer was fine with it. Kept the deal together, moved forward. Also, language in the addendum on the seller side to protect them. I mean, you might put in there, when the buyer asks for, it's contingent upon a home inspection, just acknowledge that the seller, will consider doing lender required repairs only. Because theoretically, the seller has two opportunities to get the contract renegotiated. One is the home inspection and any subsequent inspections, well and septic, radon. And then you get through all that after the seller has to make some repairs, and then heaven forbid that the lender comes in short on the appraisal or has lender required repairs. So the seller's kind of a little punching bag there for continued repairs and requests to adjust the sales price or give up more monies. So, that's one protection that I've used if I was on the seller side, to just acknowledge in the contract that the seller would consider lender required repairs only. And it kind of keeps the buyer on their toes not to come back and ask them to replace every light bulb or missing outlet cover in the house, just little minor things. So.
Yeah, and again, you got to be a little careful when you negotiate the price at this point, because if you increase the price, you got to get it to appraise. So that could open up a whole new can of worms. So know your property and know your people, and if you think that you can squeeze out a couple $1,000s more in the price, then that's fine. But if you can't, then don't do it. Don't increase the price, because you're just going to run into another obstacle.
What are your thoughts in multi-offer situations, doing a home inspection to void to strengthen the offer?
I mean, it doesn't pass fail. I mean, I think is fine. It's, you know, that still protects the buyer. They're going into it with their eyes wide open. So, you know, to have a home inspection with, you know, with an option to void, I think is good, because then it just, you know, everybody gets cut loose early on if it doesn't suit them. And I think that for a seller, it's, you know, it looks good that they don't, you know, either you're gone or I don't have to do anything, you know, and that's a good option too. And that doesn't mean that, you know, when you get to that point, that you can't maybe suggest something at that point, depending on what it is. It's like, well, we're going to void it. And the seller's like, wait, what, you know, what do you want? You know, that could happen too. You don't know. You could get to that point and you could actually negotiate a home inspection item. So, you know, to keep everything going forward, because here's the thing, even though the seller's in multiple offers right now, that doesn't mean in 2 or 3 weeks after the home inspection's done that those buyers that were there are still there. They, you know, they could have found houses and, you know, have nobody waiting in the wings. So, you know, it might be in the seller's best interest to, you know, to keep it going and negotiate with that buyer. I mean, once you got your foot in the door, you're in the door. So.
And again, you need to know your buyer. And if you're getting into multiple offer situations, you need to know your buyer. I work with some investors that, you know what, they always do for their home inspection, they just do for buyer purposes only. And they will, most of the time, they don't even do the home inspection, but it's just so that because they really don't care about the home inspection. The investors are very savvy. They know, you know, what they need to put into the house and what they don't just by looking at it. But with first time home buyers and young buyers, you got to be really careful with them. And it's not a good idea to use for buyers purposes only for people that aren't experienced in it, because they're going to get into a situation where they might not be very comfortable, you know. So know your client, you know who you're working with. And multiple offers are always a different animal. I mean, there's so many things that come into play. You know, you guys talked last week about the escalation clause coming into play, you know, which is not a lot of people use that, the escalation clause. It's, and it's not for everybody. You know, escalation clauses aren't for everybody. Home inspections aren't for everybody either. So know your client and let them decide whether they want to do a full-blown home inspection or an inspection for buyer purposes only, or whether they just want to forego the home inspection process to give them the upper hand. So sellers are going to look at that differently. Sellers, you know, it's the same thing. If you have new sellers, inexperienced sellers, or sellers that have done this many times, if somebody sends me a contract that says it's for buyers purposes only, my first thought is, you know, whether there's something wrong or not, they're going to use that home inspection contingency to get out of the contract, you know. So, and most of the times they're not even going to do a home inspection, or they might just go out there and look at it because they know they're not submitting an addendum. The only time you have to have a licensed West Virginia, well, in West Virginia, the only time you have to have a licensed inspector is if you're submitting an addendum, if you're asking the seller to change anything. If you're not asking the seller to change anything, you know, like I said, everybody's got, you know, a handyman in their family. Anybody can do the home inspection. If you're not asking for any repairs, anybody can do it. And you can say, you know, that, you know, I didn't like this or I didn't like that. So anyways, you got to know, it all goes back to knowing your buyer and seller.
One thing I saw was so important too is that you really need to understand the contract. You have to read that contract. You need to know the addendums. You need to know what inspections have to be done. And what I see in the real estate business today is you can't be lazy and stupid in this business. It's constant education, constant reading of what's new. It just goes on, you know, but knowing the contract, your people, is just beyond important.
Yeah. That's the main thing. Know your people, know the contract, so that you can negotiate to the best of your ability,
Right.
whether you're representing the buyer or the seller. So she went and
Right.
got coffee and didn't bring me one. Oh, well,
Well, agents, any more questions on this topic while we've still got the Whiteheads on the line?
I have a question about lender required repairs. I know it's not home inspection specific related, but is it fairly understood, like an unwritten rule, that your sellers are going to have to do them? Like, is that just, I'm not really quite clear on the process once that's required, and then how you go about, is it a renegotiation? Is it just understood that it's done? Is there any way out of it? I know that's a very broad and open question, but I have yet to experience that in buyer or seller side.
yeah.
Well,
So,
if the seller wants to sell their house, they're going to have to make it meet the lender's requirements.
the seller doesn't have to do anything. You know, if you hand the seller an addendum that says these are lender required repairs and they need to be done before closing, seller doesn't have to do them. Seller can say, forget it, I'm not doing them. This contract's null and void. You know, you can't force either party to get into a situation that they don't want to be in unless they sign up for it. So, and an addendum's no good unless both parties sign it. If the seller refuses to sign it, then it's a done deal, or a dead deal, I should say, and the contract becomes null and void. So that's why you need to talk to your seller up front when you're doing your listing appointment, or soon after you get the listing, that here's what's going to happen throughout this entire process. And this may come up. Lender required repairs may come up, and here's what the expectations are. But again, they don't have to do anything. You know, you can't force a seller to do something.
I have two quick questions I wanted to throw out there. What do you do if the buyer is coming in from out of state and they're not able to be present for the home inspection? And then also, I had a situation I'll explain later outside of this meeting, but I was dual agent on a deal, and there were some issues that came up around the home inspection. And I was wondering if you have any comments at all concerning how to deal with a dual agency situation.
You know, again, it's knowing the personality and where, you know, your risk and liability fall. You know, you have a duty, if you're a dual agent, you have a duty to protect both your clients. And at that point, I just make it really clear that, you know, I'm the facilitator between the two parties. And it's, you know, the seller is the one who has to decide, and the buyer is the one who has to decide. And you are just, you know, you can counsel each one, but not to the detriment of the other party. So you still have your duty to counsel your buyer, and you still have your duty to counsel your seller, but you can't negotiate that deal with them. You know, they have to do that themselves.
You can't show any preference. You can't show any preference to one or
right. So, but as far as, what was that first one you were saying?
If they're
the out of state,
a relocation, yeah.
Yeah, you know what, and that really is, you have to have a good home inspector that's very thorough with pictures. And if they have so you've got a couple scenarios. The buyer has seen the house, but they're not going to be present at the home inspection, or the buyer has not seen the house and they're still not going to be present at the home inspection. You know, you need to be able to convey what condition that house is in to that buyer, but also if they have someone else that they trust, you know, in the area, a cousin, a brother, a friend, you know, have them come and be present as well, so that you have some backup. Because, you know, as pure as our intentions are and as professional as we are, the general public, our clients, sometimes think we're just in it to make $1 and we don't really care, and that's not the truth. But, you know, it's always helpful to have someone else, if they know someone, a coworker or something, be there also if you think it's going to be a problem.
And that's why it's important that you go to your home inspections as well,
Right.
so that you can have an intelligent conversation with your client when they start asking questions. You need to be able to answer those questions for them. Whether they have somebody else there representing them or not, you need to be at your home inspections. So.
Yeah, I think the point Jill's getting to is, say the subject property is like 18 to 20 years old. The roof looks good, and that's what the home inspector says while you're there at the inspection. But then on the CYA, he's going to put in, but it's the roof's close to the end of its life expectancy. The furnace is functioning, but it's at the end of its life expectancy. So if the buyer's not there, they're reading this home inspection report and they're not seeing the whole it's in good condition now. They're seeing it's right at the end of the life expectancy, and they're getting a little scared. So
yeah. And the other thing to remember in dual agency, Jill, going back to your second question, is you've already had this conversation with your client. If you're a dual agent, when this contract was negotiated, you've already had a conversation with, if you're representing both of them. Now, if you're in a broker dual agency, you're only having a conversation with your client. But if you're representing both the buyer and the seller, you've already talked to both of them and explained to them what dual agency is.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean they listened to you. That doesn't mean they heard everything you told them, but you've already had that conversation with them about dual agency and negotiating the entire contract. So hopefully they understand that, getting back to the whole, detrimental to each party, hopefully they understand that. They don't always listen, but you've already had that conversation.
And at the end of the day, you're not making the decision for them in any case. Even if you weren't a dual agent, you cannot make a decision for the seller on what to do, what they're comfortable with. And the same thing with the buyer. So they shouldn't be putting you in that position.
But they will.
Anyway.
They will. So.
Yep. Thank you.
At best, dual agency is very tricky.
It is. You better know what you're doing, and you better use best practices when you're being a dual agent. And if you need help with it, you need to ask. I mean, there's people, in Coldwell Banker that can help you do dual agency, because it can be dangerous.
Yeah, and you know what? Even if I'm not a dual agent on that transaction, I have to maintain that arm's length. I don't get into bed with any of my clients, I just wanted to reassure him.
Isn't that a different Zoom meeting? I don't know.
But the thing is that you need to stay professional, because they can't look at you. You have to rise above. You have to be with them, and and they have to trust you that you're competent. And that's another reason why you can't get into bed with them, because the transaction will take anything that goes wrong, and suddenly you're going to be the bad guy. You always have to take the high road. You always have to take that level of professionalism. Fine, cut up, be a friend, whatever, but you can't make any decisions for them, and you have to give them, no matter what your inside feeling is, you just have to give them all of their options and let them make that decision. That's the best way all around. I mean, if you have to stand up in a court of law and defend your actions, that has to be in the back of your mind at all times. If I ever have to stand up in a court of law and defend my actions, can I do it? And that is what has to govern your, Mr. Seller, you have to make this decision. I'm not going to make this decision for you. I have contractors. I can get you quotes. I can get you 3 quotes, that kind of thing. But
yeah.
you have to stay out of the transaction.
That's so important, because as a broker, they would rather hear from you now if you're having issues than when they get a grievance, because it's really, most of the grievances are on dual agency that go to Richmond, and it's not understanding the ramifications of dual agency.
Yeah, don't forget, when you sign that, or when your client signed that dual agency agreement, it's got Steve's company name on it. So,
Steve's the agent.
The other thing you want to be careful is, and you want to be thinking about is, can Steve defend this in a court of law? Because Steve's the broker of record. So just keep that in mind. And it's a tough one. It's a dual agency is it's not for everybody.
But-
And we see it all the time, you know, it's just not for everybody. So ask questions if you have to.
Yeah.
Don't ever get into a dual agency situation that you're not comfortable with. Ask questions. There's
Right.
people that can help you.
Right. Yep. Yep.
I'm thinking there's going to be a career development class in the near future on dual agency. What do you think, folks?
It's
I
tough.
literally just texted Steven and said, can we get a class on dual agents?
I
I
think
think that would be
absolutely.
awesome.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Have one.
All right, guys. Well, Kerry and Jennifer, once again, I appreciate you spending your morning with us. Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap this party up?
No, this was great. Thank you.
And I see
Welcome.
Mr. Meadows is
Thank
making
you
an
very
appearance.
much.
There he is again.
Are we done?
Yep, we're good. I think so.
All right. Bye.
All right, guys.
See you
Thanks
later.
everybody for your participation, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.